Hello and welcome to this episode of Midlife Men with me, Philip Briscoe. Today I'm joined by Mike Skrypnek. Now Mike works with entrepreneurs and industry leaders to help them undo the kind of hard wiring in their brains in order to help them become more successful. And his theory is that if you become more open to success, you can help grow your business. But then you can also give back. You can give back to other folks working for you and other people in society. So Mike's going to share with us his wealth of wisdom today. And it's not all focused on top-level industry leaders. It's stuff that you can take away as well. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much, Philip. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, Mike, I'm assuming, or I know you haven't always been a leader and trainer of business people. I wonder if you could tell us where it all started for you.
Yeah, sometimes I would consider myself a bit of a reformed. I got out of the investment management profession. I was in the investment industry for just over 20 years, based out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which is my hometown. And about midway through that career, it was during the financial crisis. I was not happy. I was, heading towards my brand new home with my lovely family, which is currently my lovely family, in a new vehicle. And I wasn't really enjoying my business in the way I'd structured it. I just didn't feel it was as purposeful as it needed to be. And so I made some changes. And the commitment I made was to see if I can turn my business on its head and start giving instead of, hoarding capital for people. And that monumentally and profoundly changed the way I approached the work I do and repositioned my entire interest in altruism and trying to give back. And at the time, my skills were helping high net worth families plan to give their wealth back. But what was even more interesting than just the premise of flipping an industry, structure on its head effectively is the process to do so, to build a niche program, to build a niche business. And in doing that, I hired coaches and went to workshops and joined masterminds and really had some amazing people influence me along the way. And so while I was building this unique business, I got this flavor and taste for what really, was part of the, what made me tick every day. And that was the coaching part. So, and leading others and showing people a new way of looking at something that maybe they didn't think of. And so for me, I got the bug and I really wanted to move into coaching. So I figured out plans to sell my business to partners and move on. And as I did that in the late 20-teens, if you will, I began a coaching industry business. And going into COVID, I had kind of perfected this little model of workshops and public speaking to drive the business. And you can imagine when I came home from New York after setting up an entire year's worth of plans to speak on stages to drive my business on March 6th of 2020, a week later, we were shut in. And that business immediately went to zero in terms of the prospects of it. And so began a period of trying to figure it out, trying to rapidly reinvent. And what really it was a war of attrition that ended up 18 months later in one of the darkest periods of my life. As I had a business that was no longer a business, coaching people as a business coach and feeling utterly hopeless, useless, and worthless, both to my clients, to the world effectively, and my family. I decided that maybe that was the day or the 10 days I made a decision to end my life.
So how was leading up to that point? How was this manifesting then? How was it affecting your behavior?
It's interesting. When you've spent an entire, at that point, up to 51 years old, spent a career and a lifetime excelling. I'm fortunate. I have great family around me over the years, and I was used to success. I was used to finding success and rising and succeeding in things I'd tried. I always felt that somehow, some way, and I never understood it until after this whole period of time, I never understood why I never reached the full potential that I thought I was capable of, even though I was having that success. So throughout life, you begin to create this buffer this ability for others to never know what's really going on with you. And I certainly didn't struggle with mental illness, mental health, challenges like that until that moment. But it was the isolation. For me, I'm a highly gregarious human being who built a life on being in person with people. And that completely, began to dissolve. And it dissolved away to a point where it began to wear on me personally. And over time, I could show up on Zoom and it would be really easy to put on a face. And then in time, I just wanted nothing to do with that interaction any longer. And over time, I wanted to hide. And the financial stress, of course, that comes along with building a life and looking at yourself at 51 and going, what the heck just happened? How am I back at this point where I'm essentially having to undergo a reset, and I'd be better off, my family would be better off financially if I was dead than I was alive. It just seemed to be too much. And at that moment, what happened is it became very logical. It seemed very logical. And I was a person who always believed that the people who chose that exit in life, and I knew many men over the years who had exited in that way, that I thought they were cowardice. And I thought they were, it was selfish. And I thought that it was, I didn't understand the darkness they could get to. And then suddenly for me, it became logical. And when that became logical, it scared the living crap out of me. And that fear, that moment of, holy crap, this is me. I'm actually thinking that there's a pros and cons list being written out right in front of me at my desk every day. And I'm contemplating this in actuality as I go through my days. And, right now I'm not worried about whether or not my kids or my family, what the repercussions are. And it was eventually that sense that I can't do that to them. That I may have my own crap, and there's got to be a way to navigate out of it. I didn't know how, but for sure, it wasn't my duty to impose that on them for the rest of their lives. So that was the glimmer, one of the few pieces of the puzzle. The other one is I'm an optimist. At my core, I'm an optimist. You can't be an entrepreneur. You can't start new things. You can't try new things all the time without just having this glimmer of hope that it'll all work out. And so I thought maybe somehow. And lastly, I did not want to fail. I really thought that I'm a Canadian, not unlike those living in the UK. Firearms and violent ways are not just kind of not typical. So hucking myself into a river was not probably going to be a successful endeavor. I could swim, and it would suck, and it would hurt, and I'd probably survive and be a failure at that as well. So I just couldn't amplify how much of a failure I was. So I reached out and grasped for some help.
And I was going to ask you, so what did you do? You're here still. So what was that point, that pivotal point where did you go looking for help? Did you share how you were feeling?
Yeah, it was, I texted a friend, and I knew her to be a friend, a confidant. She was a former client of mine, a past client of mine, in the investment business, and a good friend and a psychologist. And, although she may not have been the ideal person to provide future therapy, she was the ideal person for me to trust that I could reach out and tell her I needed help and that she would navigate it right. And she did. It was a simple text. Diana, can I meet you over the phone tomorrow? Because I desperately need some help. And she said, absolutely. How's 10 o'clock? And from that point, the conversation ensued. And, she's an excellent friend. We have a wonderful relationship, but it's also a love with a kick in the ass. And so I always say she threw me a life preserver, and it hit me over the head a few times with it. And that was what I needed. And she understood that. And what I needed was to, number one, pull out of that nosedive. But number two, know that now I can talk about it a bit. And then the last thing was know that I never, ever, ever wanted to be back in that moment. And what can I do? How did I get there? And that was the discovery. That was the point of the beginning of discovery for me as to how I got to that moment. Because as I said, I've never really experienced any kind of mental illness that I knew of, that I was cognizant of. I don't know, maybe other people have opinions, but at the same time, I never really had experienced that. So where did it come from? It had to originate from somewhere. It just couldn't have been a random occurrence. And I didn't buy the fact that I was going into this kind of spiral as the reason. There had to have been more. And sure enough, there was more. And that was uncovered in time. And I kind of had an inclination as to what that might be.
And can you share any of that? I don't want you to tell us anything.
Yeah, no,
playing.
This is the point where, it gets pretty raw. But I've written a book, I did podcasts, I talk about this openly on stage. So and now I'm 3.5 years past it. I looked at a point in my life and I said, that's the only thing I really haven't dealt with in my life. And that was a point and I had kept a secret of abuse. I had been abused at 11 years old. And as a young boy being abused by the pillar of the community, in a way that was, sexual in nature and not, and was highly invasive, was that moment. And of course I wrapped that up and I never talked about it. I'm a guy, it's like the guy thing is that stuff never goes to the surface. And so buried, it seemed to stay buried quite well. I shared it with one person really only. That was my wife. And yet she looked at me like anyone else would look at me and go, that guy's doing okay. He's successful. He's not an addict. He doesn't have, addiction issues. He's fit. He succeeds at business. He's doing great and somehow has a great family at the same time. And he's a member of the community and up good standing. And that for me was the one thing that kept everyone from helping me get the help I needed to deal with something that could be dealt with when I was not in crisis. And this is one of the most important learnings of all that. Not only there's so many little tidbits I'll share, but that's one of the biggest things is that there was a lack of understanding around what the impact of trauma in one's life has in their future life. And, when you deal with it, it's easy to for anyone to look at you and say, well, maybe you should have spoken up at 12 years old or 15 or 28. Sure. All of that is true. But you don't. And typically a man doesn't talk about this type of thing for an average of 24 years past the incident. So, it's not atypical to keep the secrets hidden. What is very typical is the people around you don't understand the impact of what those events do to you for themselves or for other people. And that once you understand that they will live with you as patterns or instincts embedded in your brain, and they keep you going in these routines and these repetitions, that every time an opportunity comes that, kind of sets that moment off, you react. And it's very protective. Like it's a great instinct for us to protect ourselves in the forest or the jungles or the savannah, whatever it is. I'd probably be an incredible survivalist. However, in a modern office environment, sometimes those and a typical modern urban society that we live in, are protective primal instincts that are embedded in us and our subconscious level. They are not congruent with just good behavior. So, those series of patterns that were, I didn't really understand. They felt innocuous, but they started to add up over time. Every few years, it just seemed to be a repeat, a level up and then a repeat, and then step back.
Is this like, a ticking time bomb? Is it just however deep it's buried, it's going to go off? Or is it more just a kind of subtle reprogramming of just the way you develop over time and the way you think? Maybe it's a combination of the two.
There's a lot to be said about the factors, what happens to you when you experience negative and positive events, right? And as you go through a developmental period up till age 25, those things are what form our basic instincts, both our conscious and subconscious behaviors. And so, there's a lot that comes good of it. Resilience, independence, lack of worry about other people, that I'll do it myself. Like all of that was something that drove me forward, carried me forward. But in a sense, yes, there's a ticking time bomb because the intention of the learning that happens in our brains at that level, at that neuropsychological level, or physiological level rather, is that we actually wire these things subconsciously or non-consciously as instincts. Because if we overthink something in the heat of the moment, chances are historically, primitively, we used to die. and so by overthinking now our brains are saying, well, you can't overthink this. This is going to be a subconscious behavior. So now it's a subconscious behavior. So I'm not aware that when this happens, this happens. There's an algorithm to how we now embed that trauma. And that tends to have a, if this, then this, then this, then this, and then choose door B. And every time I chose door B, it either set me back financially, set me back, transitionally in terms of business or life. And then I had to somehow restart or reinvent. Some people think that's an attribute because you're reinventing and constantly growing and improving. And I think there's a value to that. But the challenge is sometimes it's at the cost. And for me, it was at a cost of tremendous financial cost and some reputational cost, and a lot of transitional cost. Restarting is not a healthy thing. And, when I was restarting just before the pandemic, I had to restart and double down on that. I had no idea what to do. So the isolation, the financial burdens, all those pressures, really did set off what was this hidden time bomb. And I always say that, one of the big reasons I never spoke about it, and, there's a lot of reasons men don't speak about these things, is the risk that I would be defined by it forever. You hear of those guys and you go, well, that guy now is the poster child for abuse. And you're like, I don't want to be the poster. I just want to do these other things in my life. That is not my calling. And so the resistance to being defined by what had happened to me, because I didn't understand how I could get beyond it, it would define me anyways. And so it's kind of that what happened to you will deal with you. And so you're right. It is a ticking time bomb. And how it manifests may or may not completely contribute to mental health challenges, mental illness, or harm of yourself or others. But I have a feeling, just like cancer, you live long enough, you're going to get it. You live in environments long enough that put the pressure on you, the right combination of pressure. And I think that's just what happened to humanity through COVID. The right combination of pressure triggered this incredible growth of mental health challenges with people. And it was because the pressure finally hit them and their instincts kicked in and they were incongruent with their natural surroundings or their modern surroundings.
I guess part of then the road to recovery then is this willing to show vulnerability then is to say, right, okay, I've hit the bottom. I can't get any lower. I'm going to admit vulnerability. And then I guess you have to start the job of building yourself back up, or with help, rewiring and building people back up.
Yeah, I strongly believe that we don't need to be forced into weakness and vulnerability to reveal it. That's one of the strongest messages I have, because about the fact that it's all connected. And I often use an analogy that when you go to okay, well, I want to get fit. I want to be fit and healthy. I want to get stronger, and I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to work out in the gym. The chances are that the day that you feel completely like dog's breakfast and you're sitting on the couch and you're feeling really poor, that's not the day you're going to end up going to the gym. You're actually people end up training before they go to the gym. It's like, I'm going to hire a personal trainer next month because I want to get trained so I can work with my trainer. Right? I really think that we should be seeing our therapists, our mental trainers in life, when we feel good. When we are also, though, aware that there's something that may be limiting us, and it can be evidenced by the repetition, the behavior, these patterns. Some are more obvious than others. I mean, it's pretty obvious if you're in a heavy addiction problem and you're harming other people, like that's an obvious one. And the community typically rallies around and says, hey, man, you've got a problem. You've got some challenges. Like, you got to deal with this. And people can be living with that for a long time before it comes to crisis. The other piece is someone like me, or men like me, that exist in all ranks and serials and wherever, they just go through life and they just don't know why they can't live up to what they expect. And they feel limited, and somehow they're repeating some behavior that they can't put their finger on it, but they're back at the same place, or restarting, or this is happening again. Why does this keep happening? And those are not so obvious because you go, I think it's because of this. And often we put the blame on others. Men are really good at assigning blame to other people. We're always good enough to be in the room. It's just not our fault that we're not in the room, right? Women tend to, and it's pretty generic. I know it's a pretty general thing. I had an interesting event with, as a soccer coach of my daughter's soccer teams, we did these trainings with girls. And, young girls often found it was, or believed it somehow was a weakness in them why they couldn't reach their goals. Young boys often find that it's other people's problem why they can't reach their goals because they're capable of everything. Right. So, there are some distinctions. And when it comes to men and boys thinking about what their limitations are, we often point at other people. And we tend not to be so introspective, which thus prevents us from that vulnerability and considering that it might be our weakness and not other people. And that's one of the key elements in how we navigate the path forward is it's not about weakness or vulnerability. I mean, those are hardwired things. We perceive risk. Men perceive not a lack of safety in our lives, but a lack of a huge amount of risk. If we show vulnerability, if we show weakness, if we exhibit ourselves to not have our shit together, we might lose what we've built. We may lose our status. We might not be able to protect and provide for our families. We may not be able to identify as the man in the house that we thought we were, or in the community. And once we've revealed that, quite frankly, once you show that you're vulnerable and weak, that those things don't happen, that we aren't living in a primitive world where someone doesn't just rush into your home and take all your stuff, take your position, take your work. If we have cultures in work that begin to understand that it's not a weakness and it's not a time for an opportunity, it's actually time for growth, then we have the ability to help men speak about these things when they're not challenged, when they're not in crisis. Crisis is too late, man. I mean, the moment a guy says, I think I need to talk to someone, that it's not, I think I'm thinking about killing myself. It's, I think I need to talk to someone. When they say that, that's the 5-alarm fire. When men in general have that conversation, that's when you go, this is the most serious thing I've heard from this man in a long time. I need to help him. I need to find a way to help this man navigate this because it's too late. If it's, maybe they're not going to take their life by the time they tell you they want to take their life, but they may have already done a ton of other damage, right? They may have blown themselves up financially, harmed other people, thrown their job out the window, like all of this stuff. It's like, I really don't believe that our intervention happens when it says, I'm thinking about ending it today. I think it's about, I think I need to talk to someone. That moment happens a lot and it falls on deaf ears.
So what do we need to do? What do we need to do? Because that's a big job, isn't it? To change that shift in society, especially in say the workplace. So what can we be doing better? How can we be listening better so it doesn't fall on deaf ears?
Well, it does start with the plain spokenness. I think we need to just have open conversations about this. I often say that one of the most difficult, most uncomfortable conversations men can have between each other is about the weather and sport. And we talk about weather and sport because it's avoidance, right? It's an avoidance of talking about anything that really matters to us. What most men don't understand is once you talk about things that matter to you, you can go talk about the weather and sport, and you can go right back. So breaking the conversation barrier, the simple on the cuff conversation barrier where we learn more about each other, and then we understand that, we're all going through some stuff, and sometimes it's an extreme and sometimes it's not, but it's typical. It's okay to not be okay. It has to be like balanced with it's okay to be okay. And in those two conversations, no one is at judgment, right? Because the guy it's okay to be okay is looking at the guy who's not being okay to be okay. And the guy who's not doing okay doesn't want any attention to that, right? And so there's a feeling of rank, there's a feeling of suppression and risk. And so we need to just eliminate that by saying that this is common conversation. We all experience this in some way, shape, or form, or know someone who has, and move on, carry on. And carrying on means, what would you do if you knew that you were, you were at risk of diabetes? What would you do if you knew that you were at risk of a heart attack and it was imminent, right, in the next few years? You would address your nutrition, you would address your sleep, and you would address your exercise. So we could start there, and we would do it before we feel like, we're on death's bed. And why don't we understand that if we've damaged ourselves, our brains, that we may need some therapy on those parts of our lives as well, and that we can just do it in normal every day. I mean, I don't know about the programs in the UK, but I do know our employee assistance programs and our insurance programs. Most people's benefits, from the frontline workers to the executive office, have pretty good massage benefits. Maybe $500 a year, but I don't know too many people who don't get that last massage by the end of December. But I do know that the majority of people never address their psychology or their therapy, their emotional therapeutic counseling type budget. It goes untouched. And why is that? Why wouldn't we just go do that? We care for our teeth, we care for our bodies, we care for the massage, but we don't care for our minds. So why don't we use it as a leveling up? And I think that that's the other opportunity, is to understand that by addressing these things that feel like opening a can of worms, being vulnerable, being weak, putting ourselves at risk, we're actually creating an opportunity for ourselves to level up, remove the limits, and exceed our potential.
So there are still stigmas, though, aren't there, which probably prevent people from taking up, the opportunity to talk to therapists through their work packages, but also probably just misunderstanding or a bit of mystery around what does it mean going to see, a therapist.
You hit on a couple of things. So stigma is an enormous part of this. What is wonderful right now, and an upcoming generation of young men, young women in our world today have grown up with it's okay to not be okay. And that message came out over COVID, and we're living it and we're hearing it regularly. This conversation you and I are having wouldn't have happened a decade ago. And so we're having a conversation in, the public purview. The challenge is it's not addressing the things that keep people from seeking help. And that's a self-stigma. That's the burden that we feel we don't want to be a burden on other people. If you only understood my thing, you wouldn't want to know me. Like, these are self-afflicted wounds that we have that are part of our internal stigmatization that we have. And it's not really part of the public purview. In fact, quite frankly, people will be lifted up these days if they tend to have, I have a challenge. Well, it's the fashion of the day to have a mental challenge. And let me tell you right now that mental illness itself is a statistically incredibly low percentage event. True mental illness. Our mental health is something we live with positively and negatively every day. And so if we think about illness and we consider a physical versus a mental illness, and a mental illness, not versus, we also think, so is blowing out my ACL. That's a very low probability knee injury thing for the general population, but it happens, right? And so what do? We go to see a specialist when we have that happen. So the same would be for people experiencing mental illness. But challenge to our mental health are being misconstrued as mental illness today. And that's this kind of like a backlash stigma that's happening, is that, anyone who's feeling a little depressed or anxious about anything has now got a mental illness, and they've got a stamp of, I'm not mentally well. And some people are actually wearing it with pride. I tend to say, that's maybe, performative. You're depressed today. Okay, well, people get depressed and anxious and feel bad and feel stress and anxiety. That's a normal occurrence of our lives and our brains preparing for something that we're unsure of. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a precursor to fall into illness. So one of the biggest things that we're losing, that we've lost, that we can regain, is the connection of peers. Through COVID, through the last decade of using a social media platforms in our lives, through burying ourselves in our smartphones and doom scrolling, and the isolationism that came out of COVID, where people moved and started doing remote work, we've lost human contact. Even Zoom or podcasts are a great way to get to know people in some way, but they're not a way to get connected. And when we're not connected, we begin to sense that we're in it alone. And we exacerbate that, we amplify, that sense of self-stigmatization. No one wants to feel my pain. And so this challenge of connection is that bridge between going for clinical help. If I tweaked my knee at boxing last night, I'm just in my class and I'm moving around and my knee's a little sore. I don't go to the emergency, right? I didn't tear my ligament. I didn't. So if I feel depressed one day or I don't feel like really up to it, I could probably muddle through. I just have to reassess. Did I sleep right? Did I eat right? Am I getting the exercise I need? Am I socializing with people? So our peer groups, our community, our connectedness create the acceptance we need to know that we're not in it alone, to understand that there's other people keeping checks and balances on us and just seeing that we're okay and seeing the things that we may not see. And what's more important, I think, than anything else is understanding that someone else has got your back. And for me, that was if I were to think of the one absolute that gave me the courage to step out of the darkness that I was in, to move forward, to dig into the most, scary part of my own existence, that abuse piece. It was my family saying, whatever it takes, we've got your back. Don't worry about the financials. We'll figure it out. Don't worry about your obligations. We'll figure it out. You just get well. We've got you. And in this stage, you probably should see somebody who is a professional. Other times, maybe it's, we've got you, and we've got you when you were back in the gym. We'll keep you accountable as a friend, as a peer, as part of our community. We'll help you stay on your diet. All of these things matter, and we've lost them because no app is going to be reliable when you decide to turn it off. It's not your accountability. It's nothing you feel obligated to. When we have a sense of obligation to live up to our peers, expectations of us in a good way, and understand that we have just as much a role to help them as they do help us in our community, then we're able to see the things and get through the things that are difficult for us. We've just lost track of that in such a big way. We have to get back to it. And, I think that there's the buffer zone is in peers. There's no psychologists. There's not enough psychologists to handle the world's psychological problems today. It's impossible on a per capita basis. If 1 in 20 or 1 in 5 people, 20% of our population is going to have a health crisis this year, mental health crisis. In Canada, that would be 8 million. What is it? 8 million. We'd need 8 million psychologists or whatever, less than 100 times multiplier, but we just don't have that. It's not available. It's going to come from our peers.
I guess one question to ask then, and hear your opinion, is, especially out of kind of COVID, the loneliness, not having that peer support group. What do you do then, especially if you feel very isolated? Perhaps you don't have immediate family around you, and a lot of men do feel that. What are they what do you do then? How do you create this peer group, or just create human contact?
Yeah, I'll share with you. I mean, the last couple of days, out of nowhere, I've been going at a pretty good pretty good pace, and I found myself without really direction in my day, without meetings, and suddenly I felt isolated. My house is empty. All my family is out doing their things, and I haven't seen people all day. And I'm like, I was feeling depressed, isolated, and alone. And it took its toll on me yesterday. And so what I'm like, so I'm building networks. Right? So that's part of the one thing that I'm doing. I'm helping develop peer networks. I do it through my Unlimited Worth project. We have something called Men Worth Meeting, which is designed to be a peer network for men through other organizations I work with. We are developing peer support training so that leaders of groups who say, I'd love to lead a group of 12 of my blokes, I would love to have my mates come and join me for a conversation once a month or every couple times a month. And maybe we go out and do something activity wise. Building that back up takes some structure and takes initiative, and bringing it into organizations like construction industry, on the ground places where people normally would never see that, and bringing it in through corporate or municipal structures helps, because it formalizes it and has people test the waters, because, in a sense they have to, and that's okay, because once they do, they tend to enjoy it. So creating peer networks, anyone can do it. I think that it's important to have some understanding of both this whole conversation about mental health versus mental illness. Most men, most people, anyone in a group that they've created, that they meet regularly with, it's good for you. I know there's lots of people and groups like that out in the world, and we're trying to formalize it as well. And that is provide some leadership training. So it's not just, so we understand what happens mental health wise, but happens navigating other people's emotions and feelings, and, what does it mean to lead? When we take on that and provide that information and training and structure for a leader, we're giving him something. And what we're giving is the ability to have others learn that behavior so they can then pass that on in their communities to the next generation, because I have a sense that we have a big obligation to make that passed down through generations. I mean, one of the big pieces of work I do today, Philip, is work with male leaders. And, I choose male leaders not because they need more help than anybody else, because everybody's, mental health challenges are unilateral, universal problem. No one anywhere is less or more exempt from that situation. We all know somebody who's challenged. The key is, though, people in leadership positions, and right now, overwhelmingly still 2/3 or more of CEOs are men, and they set the tone and the culture for their organizations. And sometimes they have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people who work with them. And in those situations, if those cultures at the very top have men who do not understand, do not care, or the suck it up mentality, or carry on and don't talk about it, and, why are you crying in the hallway? If that's the attitude, then the young men of today will never have an opportunity to break a cycle. And that cycle is that socialization of suck it up. And when we can break that at the top, we set a tone in the culture of the company that then this young generation who are open and ready to embrace, a more enlightened feeling about mental health and wellness. When they get in there, they'll be in a comfortable place, not in a place that is resistant to it. And it won't force another generation to have to go through the same experience. So there's a lot to that. Peer groups, establishing good leaders within those peer groups so that they can feel armed and ready to handle anything and be a good, strong leader in the community that's revered and helpful and purposeful. And then teaching leaders how to lead better and getting right to the core. Because, yeah,
I guess that's also something we've kind of lost over time is the elders, and maybe, two guys in our 50s, Mike, maybe, the elders actually sharing their advice and wisdom with the younger generations. And it's something which was a core part of societies and communities. And, from what you're saying, we need to bring that back then. That's maybe the key or part of the key to changing, the mindset and changing the problems around men and addressing their mental health on a daily basis. Then also more deeply looking at recognizing mental illness when it's there.
Well, and it's a shift, right? The shift that happened is men of a certain age became the men of power that dictated culture. And today, even still, 55 to 65-year-old men are in the positions of power that dictate culture across all industries. And while women are taking their place where they always, deserve to be, there's still this overriding sense that men are at those positions. And what should change is those positions of power shouldn't be revered as power positions and holding on to power, but obligatory positions to share wisdom and pass it on, and share generosity and pass it on. And that's, a lot of what I do as well, is help people consider connecting their legacy and their philanthropy with their intentions, right? And when you consider what an intention should be, is not a man growing into power and holding on to power until such time that they rip it out of his cold dead hands or cold retired hands, right? In whatever way that is. That could be the guy in the machine shop who owns the lathe or owns the die machine, right? Like he's managing that and he's like, this is my domain. It will always be my domain. And until I leave and retire and pension out, no one's going to take this from me. And instead, what they should be saying is how do I teach you, young man or young woman, to learn what I know? And how do I get to share the wisdom I've gained? Because inevitably, even though some of our youth know way more about some things than us, experience comes in time. And until you've seen everything, which you haven't really, if we live long enough, you know nothing. But until you've seen more, you don't know how to behave when more happens. And that's something we can share. We have the wisdom. I always say I can see the future. When I talk to my kids, when I talk to younger men or younger women about their futures, I say, I can see your future. I'm not a fortune teller, but I've lived it. And if I haven't lived it, there's been people in my life who have. And what I can see is this coming down the road. And you may not want to hear it. You may embrace it, but whatever. I have the chance to be a bit of a fortune teller. And here are some decision-making paths you could choose. And here are some lessons learned. And if we had more of that and less control and power positions, then I think we'd have a better chance of passing on a bigger legacy to our kids.
And let me ask you, Mike, we've talked, this podcast's aimed at men and we've talked a lot about men. But as more and more women, come into leadership roles in business, for example, in industry, do you think that's going to create a big shift as well? Because we've talked a bit generically that women traditionally are better at communicating, with each other. They're better about talking about their challenges. Do you think that that'll start to impact and kind of reduce the stigma as more and more women are kind of also in charge?
Let's just say that the culture of accommodation is better. I don't believe that it is clear that women having an ability to communicate and speak and have a life of socialization in that way leads to them creating less harm to elders and less harm to themselves. There is no question that being able to diffuse that tension, and they do it regularly and do it really well, that's a piece of the puzzle that men don't have that creates men as the problem in terms of harm. Like we are the problem. Let's be honest. Like the women's stresses in the workplace, 6 out of 8 reasons why women in construction have 10 times more mental health challenges than their counterparts in other professions is because of men. Is because of the men in the workplace. So it is about that ability to diffuse the tension. But it doesn't necessarily mean, and I know lots of women, I always say, oh, women talk a lot. Well, yeah, sure they do, but they don't always share their secrets. And their innermost secrets, and they don't have any different. In fact, statistically, they have as much or more in some regards of abuse or mental health challenges or trauma in their lives. And so if they haven't dealt with that, regardless of whether they're showing outward harm for others or outward hostility, what they are probably doing is micromanaging, they have the faults that leaders that anyone, and you would say is a toxic leader or a toxic culture in a work environment, they perpetuate it differently than men, but no differently in terms of proportion. Because if they've got unresolved things, then those things in the right pressure will come out as some kind of pattern, some kind of behavior. So, I don't think they're immune from it. I think that it's kinder and gentler. But I think that some of the things that we call toxic in a workplace are just as present with women in different forms. I think, and it's because of the universality of our mental health and how our brains get wired. It's not a gender-based thing as much as it's we're wired from trauma a certain way, and until we resolve it and deal with it, we will perpetuate whatever that pattern is. And sometimes it's good. And sometimes it has some negative consequences. If I may add, like, I know if you think about it, risk taking comes in all kinds. I was talking to my daughter about this, and we were talking, P. Diddy, and that's in the news. And, that like all those negative, those terrible things that are happening. And we're talking about, well, she goes, well, women don't commit crimes like that. And I go, well, though they may not commit those crimes, but I don't know too many. I know more women in the news over time that embezzled money than men, or had their hands on the accounting switch. And, that's just by anecdote. It's not statistical. But if I were to use the anecdote, what I was trying to imply is our mental health, our wiring of our mental health and our patterns lead us down a road that will reveal itself in certain ways. And men just happen to do it in incredibly more harmful ways. But we don't necessarily have less consequence. It's just a different type. So anyways, everyone needs some support. And if we want to reduce the tension and the stress and the harm in the world, we need to start with men.
Mike, any last advice for guys listening to this and thinking, I'm on that recurring path of making those same mistakes. I think I know deep down there's something that needs to change.
You said one of it, which is identify that if there's some patterns that keep happening, or you're using other substances to numb those patterns, then there's probably something. Understand that until you have investigated and looked into that something, that it will remain something until such time the pressure will bring it out, and you may or may not do harm to yourself or others. That is evidenced. Understand that taking those first steps mean talking to two people only, not the whole world. There is no need to share your problems with everybody else, not even your employer. You talk to one person you know, love, and trust, who you have confidence in, maybe your family, maybe not, and a therapist, a professional. You get to that first, you make those two first conversations, and you advance yourself in an immense way. And once you've done that, you're able to then begin to heal. And I don't mean heal because you feel traumatized and we're walking around wounded, but we are walking around with a potential injury that may cause us damage down the road. Why don't we fix it while we're feeling good, not on our crisis, because the crisis is too late. So those would be messages I would share, and understand that you're worthy of it, and to really deserve and feel and receive love and give it healthy. You'd be well served to find that path of healing.
Thank you, Mike. That's been really fascinating. I really thank you for your honesty as well. It's through sharing stories like yours that, resonates with other people, and, it helps them massively. So thank you so much, Mike.
You're very welcome, Philip. And you asked me earlier, what will help men help this is programs like yours, is efforts like ours, is messages that are simple, plain, understandable, accessible. This just has to continue to be a normative conversation and not a sensational one. So if we can get there and you're part of the solution, we go a long way to helping men heal.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you or someone you know is struggling with depression or thoughts of suicide, there are organisations you can call now. In the UK, you can call the Samaritans on 116 123. And in the US, you can call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you want to find out more about Mike's work, visit his website, mikeskrypnek.com. That's SKRYPNEK. And if you've got a story to tell, or you think your experience would help others, then please get in contact either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. If you enjoyed listening, then please do rate and review the podcast. It really helps raise its profile and can reach more people who might benefit from the stories shared by my guests. Finally, there is now a book called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health, which is based on the podcast and available to buy on Amazon and other online retailers.